The same people, the neoconservative figures and Zionists who are pushing us to war in the Middle East, are also pushing us back into war against Russia. Now, they're betting, and this is very dangerous, they're betting that the Russians will simply sit and take it. In other words, okay, that's fine. We've gone far enough. We'll sit here and, let us know when you want to talk again. No, I don't think that's the case. I think we're pushing the Russians over the edge where they're going to have to take dramatic and decisive action. They have been reluctant to do that for good reason. But I think after these talks in Istanbul are over, becomes clear what's really going on, which Zelensky, in my judgment, has said in a very straightforward manner. We're not going to sign up for anything that does not hurt Russia. I mean, just stop and think about that. It's incomprehensible. How do you reach a peace agreement with your opponent if the agreement itself is supposed to perpetually harm your opponent? I mean, that was the problem with the Versailles Treaty. If you go back and look at it carefully, it essentially consigned Germany to a permanent pariah role. And for that matter, Russia as well, that had then become the Soviet Union. Everyone was pushed into a corner. And of course, we know how that turned out. You push people into a corner, they're going to strike back at you. Now, we're not the country we were then. We're not as strong as we were then. Neither are our allies. We are actually in a much weaker state in every category of national power. That's why when we use this term from Lenin, the correlation of forces, we say often, I know you have and I have and others have said it, Larry Johnson, the correlation of forces doesn't favor us in this collision with Russia in Ukraine. It simply doesn't. And it's not favoring us right now in the Middle East. We're working with 9 million or 7 million people in Israel versus not just 92 million in Iran, but potentially hundreds of millions of people. It's not a good thing. It's not sensible. It's not going to lead to any sort of stable peace in the near future. So I'm glad that Zelensky spoke and said what he did, because at least he's being honest. Give us more weapons. And by the way, he has no one to use the weapons on the battlefield. So he wants more weapons in terms of unmanned systems, rockets, and missiles. He's not asking for weapons to put in the hands of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. In fact, I don't think that even bothers him anymore or worries him anymore. Ukraine is effectively a graveyard, if you want to look at it from the realistic standpoint. You've got well over 1.5, almost 1.8 million dead Ukrainian soldiers. How many others have been injured or wounded, I don't know. But that's not what he's interested in. He's interested in these, what we have talked about in the past, revenge weapons, the Storm Shadow, the Taurus, and unmanned systems that he can ship drones through airspace and launch from inside of Russia. All of this is what he's about. That just drags this thing out. And at some point, your opponent says, these people aren't serious. And they're not. And I think President Putin knows that. The problem is, I don't think President Trump understands this. He's caught up in this false dichotomy. We're good, they're bad. No, that's not the case. This is not, he keeps saying it's not my war. Mr. President, it's your war. You've made it your war. That's the problem. You should get out of it. You should have gotten out of it the moment he took over and said, we want nothing to do with this. He should have made restoring relations with Russia, good relations, his top priority. He didn't do it. He finally fell victim to the same people that sabotaged and diverted and distracted him the last time around. So at this point, I don't pay too much attention to President Trump anymore when he says these things. What does it really mean? I don't know.
Yeah, it only matters what is done, not what is said. And in terms of what's done and said, one of the other things that Zelensky is doing, you talked about how he's looking for these revenge-type weapons, and he's taken action on it. One of our viewers just showed that he launched another strike into Moscow last night. I haven't seen any reports of whether they found their mark or not, but at least he did try, because he's shooting back. Russia continues to shoot many hundreds of air attacks into Ukraine per day. They did it again overnight here too. But what really seems to motivate Zelensky, aside from his hatred for Russia and wanting these revenge attacks, is money. We've often seen, Gary's shown a bunch of times this picture from December 2023 when Zelensky was meeting with this whole room full of smiling faces and guys from Lockheed Martin and said all these different places for weapons manufacturing, because that's what they were really happy about, that kind of thing. Well, now then it seems that Zelensky has taken it another step further and made it easier for corruption to take place in his country. Watch this.
We will hold a moratorium, a ban on checking businesses and about what we have discussed with the government officials. We will hold a moratorium, a ban on checking businesses and, in general, any interference of law enforcement agencies controlling various state structures into business activities. Of course, in addition to very risky shadow sectors, such as the sphere of alcohol and tobacco products, so that there are no new gray schemes. There is also a clear list of legislative changes, specific measures at the level of the government, to really change the positive conditions for business in our country during the moratorium.
And as the Kiev Independent is reporting, that what he's done there is not making it easier to handle business for the war effort, but it just gets rid of anti-corruption agencies and makes it easier for the Zelensky regime to be corrupt. And now then what little controls there were are being taken away. How do you view the process here and the results?
Well, I think he should have titled the speech differently. It should have said, "Message to my donors." Because effectively, he's addressing this mountain of corruption on which he privately and personally also depends for his existence. The whole Ukrainian state is a kleptocracy. Almost 30-40% of everything we send in terms of cash or equipment ends up disappearing into the black hole of corruption. We know that. We've seen the photographs of Mexican cartel members walking around with Javelin missiles on their backs. So, this is not a new phenomenon. He's simply saying, look, we're giving up. We can't fix it. We can't control it, but we can benefit from it. And so I'm going to allow it. That's all. And it's going to benefit him and his regime. Now, the Ukrainian people, that's another tragic story. And we don't get truthful reports about Ukrainian feelings in the West. But the Ukrainian people have had it with this war. They want an end to it. They would welcome a peace agreement of some kind that would put an end to their misery and to this destruction. But we're not going to see it. There's something else here, and this is something I think the Russians need to learn from us. You and I lived this. In 1991, when the ceasefire was suddenly called one-sided, we stopped. And you'll recall that at the time I was not full of jubilation.
I do remember that very clearly.
Because I felt strongly this war needed to go on for another few weeks in order to go to Baghdad and end this thing. And everybody said, we don't want to occupy. Well, of course, we didn't need to occupy. We never needed to occupy. And from your experience with the Iraqi troops and the Iraqi officers, that we could have gone there, removed Saddam, and turned it over to them, and they'd have been happy to take it over and run the place. And we could have had a different outcome from what we got. But none of us knew at the time that once there was an agreement being discussed between Saddam Hussein's representatives in the United States, the question Saddam Hussein asked was, what are they doing now? Are they advancing? And the answer was no. He said, they're not crossing the Euphrates River. No, sir. Yeah, with that, he got up and he danced around the table. And he celebrated. They're not crossing the Euphrates River. We win. We've won because we've survived. I think the Russians need to look at Zelensky as kind of a Saddam Hussein figure. The only way he wins is by staying where he is. He would consider that a win. His whole country could be burned down, but he personally would consider it a win if he just stays in power. Yeah, and there was never any evidence that Saddam Hussein was terribly worried about the plight of his nation.
Yeah,
and millions of people living inside Iraq's borders. He could care less. He didn't care about the sanctions or anything else. So I think the Russians need to sit down and understand what they're dealing with. They're dealing with Saddam Hussein, somebody who could care less as long as they stay in power. As long as nobody shows up at the front door and says, hello, we're knocking, you're finished. We've got a wagon out front for you, and you're going to disappear into it and be done with you. Until something like that occurs, or he gets into a jet, which I'm sure is fully fueled and manned and standing by as it is, gets into it and tries to fly away, this will go on. And
well,
on.